Hello, can everyone hear me?
Thank you very much, Dina, for joining us, and thank you all for coming out on a Sunday afternoon to the Write Festival, which normally used to be held in Bethnal Green Library, so it's kind of nice to be in this building, and I'm sure a lot of people have been born in this building as well, so it's quite a special place. As we said, we're joined by Dina Begum, the author of Made in Bangladesh, and Dina's previously written a book as well, which is called the Brick Lane Cookbook, which is under Kitchen Press in 2018. And it's the first mainstream Bangladeshi cookbook featured, as was said, in Vogue, National Geographic and Waitrose magazine. And she is also a member of the Guild of Food Writers and featured in a micro-documentary on Great Big Story, as well as the BBC podcast Mission Curry. For those who missed it, you can probably get it online still. So we're here to ask a few questions, quite a few actually, and I've had a lot of interest from people who've got Dina's book and who've wanted me to ask certain questions. So thank you very much for joining us, Dina. I've got a copy of the book, and it's been a real pleasure, and it's full of personal anecdotes about your family, food experiences from Bangladesh and here in the UK as well. It's a real joy and a celebration of all that we love about food, in both Bangladeshi food and also how we eat and how we prepare food, which I think is really special and what sets this book apart, I think, from any ordinary recipe book. So the first question I'd like to ask, in a sector dominated by Indian cookbooks, what makes Bangladeshi food unique to you?
Thank you, Saif. Thanks for joining, everyone. So Bangladeshi food is quite different and unique in terms of the ingredients used, techniques used, and just from kind of, is it on? It's on? No. Can you hear me? Is that better? Okay, so yeah, it's definitely on. Okay, yeah, I think that's better. Yeah. So it's quite unique to Indian food and other South Asian cuisines, mainly because of geography, the ingredients used, and also the way Bangladeshi food is cooked often. The main way, I guess, it's based, the location-wise, it's based near kind of Southeast Asia as well as India. So it's got a lot of influences from different parts of the world, especially South Asia, obviously. And got Persian, Mughal, kind of Southeast Asian influences. Ingredients used are kind of quite unique in terms of, you've got molasses, dried fermented fish, coconut. So it's quite, you wouldn't, when you think about Indian food, you wouldn't necessarily associate all these things with Bangladeshi food. Also, mustard oil is key ingredient as well. So in terms of how it's different is, I guess the way, if you look at it, it looks quite similar to Indian food on the surface level because they're visually, some of the dishes are quite similar. But the way things are cooked can differ. So you can have the same spices, but have completely different results. So I guess one of the things is I wanted to highlight is how it is different, how it's cooked, and also the different influences that impact Bangladeshi cuisine. And also, I guess it's important for me to highlight that Bangladeshi food was, Bangladesh started the curry industry basically. So 80 to 90% of restaurants in the UK are run or owned by Bangladeshi people. And probably more than 100 years ago, when sailors came to the UK via the East India Company in other ways, they started creating traditional food in the UK and abroad in places like America as well. So when you look at the history of Indian or food or curry abroad, you'll see that a lot of it's based on Bangladeshi people who kind of started it all. But Bangladesh, as you may know, is a fairly new country. So it gained independence in 1971. So often people kind of forget that it is an independent country and it's quite new and it's recent. So one of the reasons I think people don't know much about it is because it is a fairly new country, but also it's up and coming at the moment. So I think it's been something that I'm really kind of proud to highlight.
And second question, you've mentioned a little bit about the importance of it, but why was it important to you personally to pass on food knowledge and to keep the traditional recipes and techniques alive?
Mainly, I wanted to preserve and promote kind of traditional recipes that were cooked from kind of by my mother, my grandmother. I'm sure a lot of people who are Bangladeshi or who have some sort of connection with Bangladesh know some of these dishes are very traditional. The way they're cooked, often it's not documented, it's not written down, passed orally through generations of usually women. So this is something that was important to me to kind of document those things, not just the recipes, but also the way they're made and the stories behind them. And these are things that are dying out slowly at the moment. So it was important for me to preserve these and just kind of create a book that not only highlights Bangladeshi food, but also celebrates it and also celebrates Bangladesh in a way through the food itself.
So you've wonderfully woven 6 seasons of delightful dishes, from light bortas, deep curry dishes, to well-known dishes from events, weddings, annual festivals, alongside everyday family recipes. Which is your favourite dish or dishes from the cookbook, and why?
It's hard to choose. I've collected kind of all my favourite dishes. I've got regional kind of specialties from friends and family and through my research as well. But I think the bortas hold a special place in my heart because it's simple everyday food, it's comfort food. So anyone who knows Bangladeshi food will know you can have a simple lunch or as a multi-course meal, you'll have bortas. So I'd say the borta dishes as well as some of the sweet dishes, which are kind of personal to me and that I learnt from my grandmother. And so I think mostly vegetarian dishes and also some of the fish dishes, especially the ilish or hilsa, which is one of the it's called the queen of fish in Bangladesh. So it's very important to people to enjoy that.
And we're going to get into the fish question a bit later. What's quite endearing about the book as well, you have lots of personal memories, and one of them is your father's allotments. And there is a movement, isn't there, locally and across East London, where you can recognise Bangladeshi gardens just by the way the gourds and the hyacinth beans and pumpkins are sprawling out come spring and summer. Tell us about that link to the land, the growing of fresh produce. How does that affect you?
I think when a lot of Bangladeshis moved to the UK, it wasn't common to have these traditional kind of ingredients available in the shop. So when we had them, and I'm sure you know, and many people who grew up in London or East London will know that when you did get them, they were wilted, they'd had probably about 12, 14-hour journey. So it wasn't the freshest of ingredients. But it's key to Bangladeshi cuisine are the local and seasonal ingredients, the vegetables you have, the pumpkins, the gourds, and everything that's connected to Bangladeshi food. So without those ingredients, you wouldn't get the desired kind of effect if you made a dish. So for me, my dad started growing a lot of vegetables, which I kind of mentioned in the book, at first in our kind of balcony when we lived in a flat in Limehouse, and then Bethnal Green as well. So I grew up around Hamlets, and it was really nice to see that he was growing these things, mainly tomatoes and chilies at first, small kind of, potted kind of plants. So obviously we didn't have a lot of space. And it was nice to have those fresh kind of ingredients, especially the chilies. You have the Naga chili, which is really hot and important to Bangladeshi food. So it's, for me, it was nice kind of seeing that, I guess, journey. Like you say, it was a movement or kind of a bit of a revolution in terms of gardening in Bangladeshi people, creating those Bangladeshi gardens in the UK, whether it's in the garden, on the balcony, or allotments. Eventually, people started kind of getting allotments locally, and when they moved out further out of East London. So we live in kind of Barking Dagenham now. So it's whether it's Redbridge, Barking Dagenham, Essex, everyone's got more space in terms of a garden or an allotment. So that created a huge opportunity for people like my dad to kind of grow these traditional vegetables and kind of, I guess, bring the Bangladeshi kitchen alive, because you'd have those produce which are more fresh and more seasonal, so you could grow them most of the year. Obviously, the British weather permitting, you wouldn't get everything every year, but some years, we had a good yield. And so my dad used to grow everything from gourds, pumpkins, leafy vegetables, everything that he would normally get in Bangladesh. I think, pretty much 99% of things that he would have in his home garden in Bangladesh, we would have here. So we're quite lucky to have all that fresh produce. And I've seen many, people, friends, family members growing these produce in their gardens and allotments. So it's been, really nice to see that people are not only growing the things that they're familiar with, but also sharing these vegetables and fruits with, like my dad used to share them with his, friends at the allotment, from different backgrounds, different cultures, who were really keen to learn about Bangladeshi vegetables and greens and things. So yeah, that's impacted hugely in terms of how people are cooking Bangladeshi food. And when someone's finding out about Bangladeshi food now, I think it's kind of easier to get hold of these ingredients, because a lot of the times, as you may have seen, people grow things and they sell the surplus to local shops.
That's right, yeah.
So that's kind of nicer way to kind of get things. Also, not that haven't spent hours on a plane, so it's more kind of eco-friendly in a way as well. So you're having less of that produce from abroad and more kind of homegrown here.
That's a very good point there. These days, there's TikTokers with increasing fast food, hybridized alternatives, doing all sorts with food, sometimes very unusual things. You speak about soul food in your book, which is often also slow food. Where have you witnessed the rituals in cooking around you, and what's your view on contemporary trends versus classics?
I'm not much of a trends person, so I'm quite old-fashioned. So I think for me, it's about preserving traditional recipes and techniques. So I do as much of that as possible. Obviously, through my book, I try to simplify methods and techniques. So you can use a spice grinder, for instance, rather than using a traditional kind of a slab of stone shield butter that we have in Bangladesh and things like that. So for me, I do see these trends, and I think in a way it's a good way for people to kind of learn more about Bangladeshi cuisine, even if it's in a trend-setting kind of way. Younger people will do something that's more of a hybrid dish or include kind of ingredients that are familiar to Bangladeshi cuisine, but I wouldn't necessarily cook it that way. But in a way, to the wider audience, it gets people to be more interested in Bangladeshi food and think, oh, this is an ingredient I'm unfamiliar with, so let me delve deeper into Bangladeshi cuisine. So in that sense, I think it's a benefit. In social media, it's got pros and cons, but definitely the plus point is I have seen Bangladeshi food becoming more popular and people sharing more of their food online, whether, sometimes due to kind of, I guess, practical reasons or language barriers, people don't speak necessarily English, but they can share the food that they cook at home. So you see all the traditional, mums and aunties cooking things and, gaining kind of knowledge not only of connecting with people. For them, it's connecting with the wider world and sharing their experiences, but also for people to learn more about Bangladeshi food. And not just the food, like I say, also the culture and the history of Bangladesh as well.
Next question. Inside Made in Bangladesh, we journey through other regions of food, Borishal, Chittagong and Sylhet in northeastern Bangladesh, where your family come from. How is Sylheti food different from other regions in Bangladesh?
So a lot of, especially in London, a lot of people are from Sylhet, which is northeast, as you say. And for me, it's quite distinct. I mean, obviously, when I grew up, that's all I knew. So majority of the food we had were Sylheti specialties, plus some food from Dhaka, the capital, which most people are familiar with. So it's more kind of fiery. It's full of spice. We have a lot more fermented and dried fish, and there's specialty ingredients we have called shatkora, which is a citrus fruit. So some of you may know it's an amazing kind of bittersweet citrus and very aromatic, and it's used primarily for cooking. So you wouldn't necessarily eat it or cut a slice up to. There's not very much juice in a shatkora. So it's quite kind of very aromatic and pungent, and you wouldn't necessarily think that you're going to use a lot of citrus in fish dishes or chicken. But in Bangladeshi food, we have citrus peels, different types of citrus, lemon, clementine peel with fish, which is a recipe that I've shared that my mum used to make. So there's a lot of citrus, there's a lot of spice. Plus, there's a lot of kind of mellowness as well in terms of coconut used, molasses. So there's sweets dishes as well, specialty pittas, which are rice-based sweets and savouries. So I try and highlight all those things that I grew up with. But then through writing the book, I've discovered that obviously there are a lot of similarities with other kind of parts of Bangladesh. So it's just kind of trying to, what I wanted the book to be was not to focus on where I'm from, but have obviously a bit of a focus on that, but also celebrate Bangladesh as a whole, regional and seasonal recipes. So anyone coming from Bangladesh or new to Bangladeshi cuisine would find something in it for them and learn more about the regions, about the seasons, and get a broader view of Bangladeshi cuisine.
And the book does that really well. I mean, you mentioned there's 700 rivers in Bangladesh or something. It's ridiculous.
Yes, I don't ask them to name them.
And obviously you can't miss that without having a fish debate, really. And you mentioned a fish debate, which has probably been going on for a millennia. What is it, and which fish dish is your favourite? And if you were to swap your favourite fish with an English or European fish, which would you swap it with? What would you swap it with?
So yes, the book includes some essays on Bangladeshi, I guess, not just food, but also things such as I call, the great fish debate. And that's mainly because everyone who comes from Bangladeshi family is obsessed with fish. Most of us are. And I remember my dad, used to always have a conversation with my mum. Most of the time when he got fresh fish, what we're going to cook it with, which parts of the fish should be cooked with certain vegetables or ingredients, and when are we going to have these dishes. So it'd be a mixture of things that impacted that. There would be huge conversations on kind of even abroad, to uncles and family members, what's in season, how's the yield been this year, and what's the produce like in London compared to Bangladesh. Because of course, abroad, people are growing the fish or, farming the fish. And we used to have a lake in Bangladesh, in Sylhet. So we'd have a fish, everything literally was from the land, so which is different from how we are enjoying Bangladeshi food in the UK. So in terms of favorite fish dishes, I think the ilish is my favorite, 100%. I love, it's a mustard fish dish with ilish or hilsa. And it's really pungent, very fragrant, but it's delicious. The flesh of the fish is very sweet and delicate and full of bones, but don't let that deter you. So if you haven't tried it, it's something that you have to try. Also, not necessarily fish, but seafood. I have a dish with the prawns, so prawn chingri paturi, which is again prawns kind of chopped up in a mustard paste, and then it's kind of cooked in a banana leaf, and it's kind of steamed in that. So that's a favorite as well.
And so, what would you swap it with? Your hilsa?
Oh, what would I swap it? Hilsa. Oh, you're testing me now. So, hilsa. Did I say with hilsa? I think salmon. I think salmon because it's quite strong and it's got a kind of fatty flavor similar to hilsa. So, in my book, I've listed all the ingredients as I would cook it at home, as I've kind of been taught to cook. So you have the traditional Bangladeshi fish and ingredients, but then I've also suggested substitutes for when you can't get those ingredients. So I've got substitutes for all the fish that I use in the dishes, substitutes for some of the veggies. So I think wherever you live, even if you can't get hold of those traditional dishes, if you get hold of most of the ingredients, you can definitely substitute and create a very similar version.
Great. And your book, when you pick it up, actually, when I picked it up, I was quite amazed by the kind of explosion of colour really inside it. I mean, just from the graphics, the photography, by Liz and Max from Harala, Hamilton and Drick as well, the famous photo gallery from Dhaka. What was it like to collaborate with all of these different entities?
For this book, I had a vision for this book for years, for probably about 20 years. So when I finally got the opportunity to work on this book, I was very lucky. My publishers were really amazing. They literally let me have free reign over everything, which photographers do you want to work with, how should the book look, the cover design, literally every single page, every single presentation of the dish or representation of the dish, how things are even styled, because Bangladeshi food in terms of visually how it looks is quite different to, as you know, from Indian food. So even the way, the cutlery, crockery, the tablecloth. So I try to include as much of kind of Bangladeshi, I guess, design aesthetics into each photograph, into each dish as possible. So when people look at it, they won't think, oh no, this is an Indian dish. So there might be, if you're new to it, you think, oh, this is quite different, looks slightly different. So there's a different kind of dish. So there's a lot of earthenware kind of dishes. There's checkered garments, tablecloth and things like that. We eat with our hands, so there's not, unless, apart from the desserts, there's no cutlery in the photos. For me, it was such a joy to work on this book because I wanted the book not to be just about food, but to be a representation of Bangladesh itself. So a lot of people don't know about Bangladesh. So for me, it was important to kind of bring them the joyfulness of Bangladesh as a country, the culture, the arts, the crafts, the stories, the music. I talk about literally everything. So for me, it was kind of, how can I include everything in a very kind of succinct way in one book? So for someone who's new to Bangladesh, not just the cuisine, they can find out about how we eat, how we kind of live, what are the festivals. We're talking about the season. So it's split into 6 seasons, which is what Bangladesh observes. So you've got, spring, summer, autumn, late autumn, winter, and monsoon. So it's different to the 4 seasons kind of most people generally have. Obviously, due to climate change, you're not going to have those distinct seasons now, sadly. But there's still that kind of representation, how people eat seasonally. There's a representation in terms of the festivals, there's music. So each season, you have the rainy festival, the summer festivals, Boishaki or Poila Boishak, the first beginning of the summer kind of season, you have a huge festival, and that's also centered around food. You have the rainy season, you have all the specialty dishes, khichdi, which is a rice and lentil dish, begun bhaja, aubergine. So you have kind of everything's kind of dictated by the season and the celebration. So it's a very joyful way of eating and cooking. So it's not just a dish that doesn't really connect somewhere. There's always a kind of deep connection in each dish.
Well, I definitely felt that, and I think I've actually tried to make one of your dishes a number of times, and one of them, the rice pitta, which I had my fingers covered in lumps of rice flour for quite a while actually, and it was kind of difficult to kind of wash off. But the edges were a bit shaky, but you know what? It did taste really good, and it transported me to a memory of having khatl with rice pitta in the morning in Sylhet.
And khatl is jackfruit.
Jackfruit.
Jackfruit, if anyone's not familiar.
So jackfruit with rice pitta, sometimes you have it as a breakfast, it's a kind of dry, fruity breakfast. So how have you made the book accessible to people who have not experienced Bangladeshi cuisine before?
So I think, did we mention slow food before? Yes, so that's one of the important factors in this book. So there's no kind of shortcuts really. There's kind of simplified versions of things, so it's easier for people to kind of cook from the book, and I've made it as accessible as possible. But I've included recipes, how I've kind of cooked them or learned to cook them growing up. So pitta, as I said, rice-based sweets and savouries. There's hundreds of varieties. I've written an essay on it, and it's like you have sweet recipes, you've got dumplings, flatbreads, you've got fried cakes. So they can be something sweet from a flatbread to something that's, savoury from the flatbread that you were saying. You can make up dumplings that are steamed. So there's countless versions of pitta, and they do take some practice and a little bit of time. So a lot of the things I say, a lot of the recipes for pitta, I would say, or the special occasion dishes. So I would say, it's a weekend project, just like you would make, a pastry or make pasta on the weekend, dedicate an afternoon to making pitta, and then you'll be, left with a huge kind of delicious kind of assortment of food that you can enjoy over the weekend. And sometimes they're quite kind of, they last for a few days as well, because, Bangladesh didn't, like a lot of countries, and it's only recently the Bangladesh had kind of refrigeration, and people didn't, in the villages especially, we didn't have fridges and freezers. So a lot of things were kind of gluten-free, dairy-free, like pittas, a lot of pittas are dairy-free, gluten-free. So you can leave them out in a kind of cool place, covered, and enjoy them over the course of a few days or up to a week even, and just reheat them as you go along. And also enjoy them in different varieties. Like the pitta, one of the pittas I have in the book is called choy pitta or mera pitta, somebody may know it as. It's a dumpling made with rice flour or ground rice. And you steam it and you can enjoy it straight away with ghee or molasses, or you can kind of leave it to cool down and then kind of heat it up on a griddle pan so you get charred bits, and then enjoy it with a curry. Or have it for breakfast the next day, like 3 different ways that we commonly eat it. Slice it up and kind of cook it with onions and some coriander and chilies and a bit of turmeric and salt. And it's amazing because you have 3 completely different dishes from one dumpling that you make.
That's amazing. Here we go. One question about what advice would you give to prospective writers sitting on a cliff's edge, wondering if they've have enough of a novel or a cookbook waiting to burst from inside of them?
I'm sure everyone's got some sort of creative project or book, in them. And I think the main thing is choosing something that you're passionate about. If you enjoy something, you love something, you want something that you can share with the world, or you want to share with the world that hasn't been done before, or even has been done, but you want to put your own spin on it. I think the main way is to just start, share it in, I started off food writing with a blog, so that was more than 10 years ago. And I loved kind of just sharing weekly recipes and stories connected to those recipes. And for me, it was a way to just document things I'm cooking, but also share some of my history and knowledge and things with other people, and just kind of create a community of people. And over the years, I've been lucky that I've had kind of I have grown a community of people that I've kind of connected with on social media and in real life as well through my food. So I feel if you've got something that you want to do, then just get started. It doesn't matter how small, how big. It's always amazing to share things with people that they're not familiar with.
And finally, before we start to open up the questions, I'm sure you've got some questions. Made in Bangladesh. You've carefully curated the dishes and even lists of food that go together for events, for borta parties, for brunch breaks and little sample menus as well. It's a real treat. How would you sum up Bangladeshi cuisine in a nutshell, and what would you want people to take away from this book?
So for me to sum it up, it's quite difficult because but now having thought about it, after having been asked the question to sum it up, I would say there's four kind of elements for me, which is rice, fish, pita, which are the rice-based sweets and savoury, and bortas, which are the kind of mashed dishes. Usually it's mashed by hand, and it can be something usually vegetarian, or you can have fish kind of bortas, or even meat. So I've got a beef borta in my book as well. So its key components include mustard oil, chilies, coriander, onions, and garlic. So onions can be raw, or they can be sautéed, and they can be as simple or kind of, you can make them with kind of raw ingredients, just boil a potato and put everything together. Or you can saute some onions, you can fry some red chilies, and then you crush them into the borta. So, or you can make it, if you make it with fish, obviously cook the fish, fry the fish, or fry the beef, and then it becomes more of a substantial meal. So for me, borta is, the soul food, like I was saying, quintessential soul food of Bangladesh. And again, pita, so if anyone isn't familiar with Bangladeshi food, that will be an easy way for them to access the key kind of flavors of Bangladeshi cuisine. So you have aloo borta, the potato one, which everyone's familiar with if you've ever had Bangladeshi food. So and it's just on the surface it looks like mashed potato. So I had a friend of mine who's not Bangladeshi thinking, oh, it looks like just a spicy mashed potato, but then you enjoy it and you eat it, and you eat it with rice, often with plain rice, and you realize how unique it is and how different the flavor. It's very punchy and it's very aromatic. And it's not like just a spicy mashed potato, so it's very unique. So when you have it, you just think, this is the mustard oil. You can also taste it's very pungent and very aromatic. So that's a nice way to kind of gain an insight into the everyday flavors of Bangladeshi cuisine. Plus, we have a lot of vegetarian dishes, so I think it's suitable for everybody. It's very vegan friendly. There's not a lot of dairy in it unless it's a special occasion dish. So when I talked about the different seasons, what the book is split into 6 seasons and 6 chapters, you'll see that most of the dairy kind of dishes go into the autumn season, where it's like typically the Bangladeshi wedding season in Bangladesh. So it's a cooler month, and people are kind of having all these festivities, and they have the wedding kind of biryanis, the pulaus, the roast chicken, which isn't roast how we traditionally see it in the West. It's chicken that's pan fried and kind of like a post roast. So you pan fry it and then cook it in a kind of light gravy or caramelized onions. And again, pita is something that most people are not familiar with. So I think that's a way to gain more of an insight into Bangladeshi cuisine, because you have so many different regional varieties and specialties as well. You have crepes that are stuffed with, like a creamy rice puddingy filling, which is called kirsha, or you have coconut and molasses stuffed inside the crepes, or you have molasses cakes, like I talked about the pita before, that you can eat in 3 different ways or more probably. You have, flatbreads, also kind of black gram and rice flour bread, which I have called kalai roti, which is specialty from another region. And you have that with the borta and aubergine, smoked aubergine borta. So it's very many, I think, so many different textures, right? Textures and flavors, and it varies a lot season to season and region to region as well. So I think each region itself has a huge, vast kind of distinct array of dishes. So I would suggest, just looking into the regional specialties and just trying season by season if you can. So yeah, those I would say would be the main things. And also sweets, not to mention, Bangladesh is known for its sweets. So many different kind of desserts and pastries as well.
There are a lot of sweets in them. There's a lot of names of dishes that I've not heard of. So or maybe I've eaten, but I don't know where they came from or how they were made actually. So it's been a real eye opener. And I want to open up to the audience for those who've been down to ask a question. Do start over there. We'll take the first one over here. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Oh, I don't know how to use this thing. So.
Just talk to it.
Hi, I'm a Kolkata Bangali, so very different to your style of cooking, and also to do with how spicy, because ours is more bland than you guys. So you were talking about different regions. I'm very curious because nobody ever mentions Chittagong side. So what do they have? I know in India every state has a different thing.
Yes.
This is not, and that would be interesting to know. And my second question is that where can I buy your book?
Thank you, Nina. So yeah, I do mention all the kind of regions of Bangladesh. There's 8 divisions. So Chittagong is in the south, so it's bordering Myanmar or Burma, and again, it's got a lot of Far Eastern flavors in Chittagong cuisine. So I do special in the book. I've tried to include at least one recipe from each region. So in Chittagong, I have the durushkura, which is pot roast chicken. So you kind of sear the chicken in a pot, and it's a special occasion dish, and then you cook it in like a milky gravy, and it's quite mild and mellow. So if anyone's ever had it, or if you're familiar with Chittagong cuisine, and it's an amazing kind of special occasion dish. It's a whole chicken, skinless, so which was quite unusual because sometimes that's how we don't include the skin on chicken when we cook Bangladeshi food. So you have to get a skinless chicken, and you kind of marinate it overnight, preferably. You sear it, and then you cook it in a pot with gravy and a lot of fried onions. And it's a kind of a traditional dish that was kind of made to welcome a new bride or groom into the family in Chittagong. And that's eaten with shada pulao or plain kind of pulao rice. And then I also mention mezbani mangsho, which I have in the book as well. So mezbani means like hosting people. So mezban are guests as it's known in Chittagong. So people kind of have huge feasts, and usually around religious occasions. And it's kind of, again, I guess one of the differences they'll know in Kolkata or West Bengal, there's no beef. Usually people don't eat beef. And I'm sure some people do. But often that's, I guess, the difference between, which I should mention, between Bangladeshi cuisine. So I always refer to it as Bangladeshi cuisine as opposed to Bengali cuisine. Although you can call it Bengali, and people do. But when you say Bangladeshi, it kind of differentiates it from West Bengal cuisine, which is Bengali cuisine as well. So people know it's from Bangladesh itself, geographically. And as you say, the flavors are milder in West Bengal or Kolkata. And so in Bangladesh, there's like a huge kind of mixture of kind of flavors. So some dishes are very mild and mellow. Like the region I'm from in Sylhet, it's quite fiery. Chittagong can be very spicy as well. So Chittagong food is very spicy. Mezbani mangsho, the beef kind of, it's a beef curry. It's slowly simmered, and it's got a lot of rich spices. It's got a particular spice called raduni, which you can't often find in the UK. It's wild celery seeds, so if you can get hold of it, I would say try and get hold of that if you can. It's tiny specks, and but it's got a very earthy, aromatic flavour. So I've tried to include those couple of dishes in the Chittagong region, and also talk about the different kind of flavors that they have. So I hope anyone who's not familiar with Bangladeshi food, they can find out a little bit about the regional specialties and flavors. So yeah. Yes, of course. There's fish dishes. Those are the specialties in terms of, if I were to highlight kind of popular dishes from Chittagong, I would say the chicken dish as well as the beef. But there's so many other dishes. Obviously, fish overall in Bangladesh, in all regions, wherever you go, every family will have fish specialties. And there's a lot of kind of fish dishes that are kind of universal throughout Bangladesh, like the ilish. You have the pabda, which is like a flat, long fish. And you've got a lot of seafood, other seafood, prawns are used quite often as well. So it's, I think Chittagong cuisine in itself is completely different. I mean, you'd need a whole book to explore the intricacies of Chittagong cuisine in the south, because again, it's got a lot of local kind of influences. And I think a lot of food is very specific because they use ingredients that are used locally. There's one recipe that I did want to include from Chittagong, but I couldn't because it was almost impossible to replicate the flavors. Chui jal. So chui is almost looks like a stick or a twig. It's a type of spice, or but it's almost impossible to get it in the UK unless you've got a specialist person kind of probably getting it from Bangladesh. So I couldn't find it. Even when I went to Dhaka, when I was writing the book, I couldn't get hold of it. So I thought there's not a suitable substitute. There's no point kind of putting it and then including the kind of main. It's like making beef shatkara with that citrus, but not putting shatkara in it. So you wouldn't get the same effect. But yeah, I hope everyone learns a little bit more about each of the regional kind of influences, including Chittagong, in the book. Yes, of course. Yeah, so it's got all those influences. Like there's a lot of dried and fermented fish, a lot of tamarind, coconut, molasses. So you get all of those, and some ways of cooking as well. That's probably, you'd think is Southeast Asian. So some of those flavors that you wouldn't necessarily get in the north or northeast, that where I'm from. So So molasses is, gur is both molasses and jaggery. So jaggery is the more kind of crystallized, hard form of gur, as we call it. So when I say molasses, it's the softer version of gur. So it's date palm sap. So with jaggery, it's made from cane, but with what I refer to as molasses is date palm molasses. So it's made from the sap of the date palm tree. So it's the water collected early morning, and then you kind of simmer it over a huge vat, over kind of smoky fire. So you get that really smoky. If you can get it around locally, there's lots of Bangladeshi shops. I would definitely think everyone should try that because it's the smoky molasses. And it's not the same as date syrup that you can get in Middle Eastern cuisine. It's date molasses, which is not made from dates itself, but from the sap of the tree. And it has more of a smokiness, and it's more viscous, so it's more liquidy, and it can range from consistency of, I guess, honey to more kind of viscous kind of syrup.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Another question of, oh yeah, we've got a third one over there, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
At first, I am congratulating to you as a Bangladeshi.
Thank you.
And I have a question to you. How you inspired to write this type of book? And I think I don't have it yet, but I will do it, and it will be helpful for such Asian people and the other communities of this country. And could you let us know that how you inspired and how many feedback you get it? Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify, what inspired me to write the book, did you say?
Who you inspired or how you
Who inspired me?
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, it's my family, mainly. Family growing up as a Bangladeshi person, and mainly because I grew up in the UK. I mean, I came here when I was 4, so I didn't have much of a recollection of Bangladesh itself. So for me, it was a way to connect with my heritage. My dad, mum and dad, most of my family members, they were really keen to kind of, for us to stay connected to our heritage through the food in particular, song, the drama, was to be involved in poetry. Bangladesh is rich in a lot of literature and art, so all of those things. And for me, I wanted to kind of create a book that and honored the stories and memories, of people like my grandmother, great-grandmother, their recipes that they passed down, and also just celebrate the country, where I was born. And for me, it was really important to do that because growing up, all I saw was the negative stuff on Bangladesh. You see the floods, climate change, things happening, disasters, natural or otherwise, and I just wanted to create a joyful book that celebrated the happiness of Bangladeshi people and the country via the food. So it's kind of, food is a great way to introduce someone to a culture and a country. So I think if you enjoy the food, you don't need the language, you don't need to know anybody Bangladesh, you can just create the food, enjoy it, and then, choose to, learn more about the country and find out about the people. And I just wanted to kind of share something with people from Bangladesh and also here, and also not Bangladesh people who don't know about Bangladesh. I mean, a lot of my friends aren't from Bangladesh, but they always used to ask me, how can we make these dishes? Do you have a recipe for this? And often I didn't have a recipe for it because we're just used to cooking, how mum taught, put this much of this or this much of that. And there wasn't anything written in English in particular. So there's a lot of books in Bangla, I'm sure you know, but I wanted something that's accessible for everyone, whether they're Bangladeshis growing up in the diaspora, abroad, or non-Bangladeshis who were interested in South Asian food and Bangladeshi food in particular, so they could learn about the country, learn about the people, and just enjoy the deliciousness I grew up with, all the delicious dishes. I wanted people to kind of have a way to create them again, Thank you.
Thank you. There was a number 3 at the back there, yeah.
Yes. Good question. Thank you for that. But one of the other reasons for creating this book was to pass it down to younger generations and future generations as well, who didn't have, even people my age. I'm not going to say my age, but I've been around for a little bit, and but a lot of my friends or my peers don't know how to cook certain dishes. So I think it's a way for them to, whether it's because they were busy studying, working, or whatever happened, or they just didn't have people around, to teach them. So I want to kind of share these recipes with the younger generations. And people like, one of the people I dedicated this book to was my niece, and she's 6 years old, and I try to involve her in cooking these traditional dishes. So I want people to kind of go away and find this book a useful resource in terms of creating these recipes that they may not have learned or known about. So through social media, like you say, it's a huge platform to share these things with. And obviously, I mean, I'm on social media at Dina's Food Story, so on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok as well. So it's one of those things that I think it's a easy and accessible way for people who are younger to just look at how something's made and learn more about it. And also, this is a book that someone, if they're off to university or wherever, and they want to create those dishes that they ate at home, but there's no one to teach them, that they can just, flick through the book and find some dishes that they can make. So, I mean, it's got everything for everybody. So there's simple dishes as well as more kind of time-consuming dishes. So I hope there's something in it for everyone.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Thanks, Dina. It's really, really nice to hear you talk about the book.
Thank you.
I'm sure I'm not the only one that's feeling a little bit hungry at the moment. I don't have this book yet, but I have got your other book. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about the kind of the move from one book to the other, or maybe the differences or the ideas behind those books.
Yeah, thank you.
And I love your
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, Brick Lane Cookbook, it's been about 5 years, coming up to 6 years, and that was to celebrate, I guess, the earlier part of my life in the UK. So when I came here when I was 4, my dad used to be a tailor, just working off Brick Lane, and I talk about that in the book. And I used to go to the markets with him on Sundays and just see the vast range of different cuisines, not just Bangladeshi. So I wanted to kind of, I guess, create something with the Brick Lane Cookbook about my childhood growing up from the age of 4 up until kind of my mid-late teens around Brick Lane, and seeing all the kind of Bangladeshi vendors and the Bangladeshi flavours, as well as the other key flavours, which you have Spanish, Italian, French, Jewish. There's a lot of history in that area. So I wanted to kind of include that in a book where people could find these kind of, I guess, immigrant cuisines, and it used to be huge, it still is, immigrant hub, Brick Lane. So I wanted to share the history as well as the food of that area, and also kind of share my childhood growing up around that area where I enjoyed a lot of Bangladeshi food, but also learned about other cuisines and other kind of communities. And so from that book, I mean, it was, as you know, it's got a lot of traditional dishes, but it also has a lot of I guess, I don't like the word fusion, but dishes that are East and West blended dishes. So I have spiced kind of cakes and things in there. And that was a way to, and I love baking, which is another thing that I love to do. I know this book is very much Bangladeshi traditional, but Brick Lane has a lot of kind of baked dishes, cakes and pastries and biscuits. And that's another love of mine. So for me, Brick Lane was a way to kind of, when I published Brick Lane, or just coming up to publishing Brick Lane, not a lot of people were interested in including publishers or editors in Bangladeshi food. So they thought, this is not something people would be interested in. It's, more geared towards Indian food. So we're not sure if there's a market for it. And I wanted to prove them wrong. So I thought, there is a market, because through my blog, through interaction with people on social media, and then Brick Lane was a way, it's kind of like an introduction into Bangladeshi food. So it's kind of split between half Bangladeshi food and half kind of other cuisines that I kind of enjoyed growing up and just kind of when I was younger. So for me, that was a way for people who were completely new, weren't necessarily interested in Bangladeshi food, but just interested in Brick Lane. But it's a way for them to also learn about Bangladeshi cuisine and a bit about my kind of childhood and background in that book. And then when that book came out, people, really, wrote to me all the time, messaged me on Instagram, Facebook, and said, where can we get more Bangladeshi dishes? So strangely enough, it wasn't practically all the comments I had was about Bangladeshi food from that book, because even though it was a mixture of cuisines, people wanted to know about Bangladeshi cuisine, and they wanted to know how could they get more traditional dishes, learn more about Bangladeshi cuisine. And so I knew, which I knew before the book even, but I knew people were interested. But it's just about proving, in publishing, there has to be an audience. It's a business at the end of the day, and sadly, but for me, it's a craft and I love doing it and it's a labor of love. But in order to get a book like, made in Bangladesh out there, you have to kind of show people, publishers, that people are interested in learning about Bangladeshi cuisine. So in a way, it was a nice kind of entryway into teaching people and just sharing with people Bangladeshi cuisine and culture. So I hope that answers your question.
I had a question, Dina, actually. First of all, I thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.
I enjoy cooking at home with my family and friends as well. I was just wondering if you, like me, prefer to cook, it's a bit weird, prefer to cook for people rather than actually eating the food. was wondering if you have the same affliction.
You know,
That's a good
that's
question.
not a bad question, because I think everyone will know when you're cooking and spending a few hours in the kitchen, your appetite kind of decreases. I don't know if that happens with you guys. So I know when I'm cooking and I've spent a few hours in the kitchen, I'm probably eating less than when someone else, like my sister over there, she's a great cook, and my friend Bridget, I've had their food, so I can vouch for them. But I love, I eat more. But when I'm cooking, I tend to eat less, and I love cooking for people. I think somebody asked me yesterday, you must love cooking for a huge crowd, because Bangladesh is known for like big events and big functions. And I said, no, actually, I enjoy cooking for a small crowd, more intimate gatherings, so you can talk to people and have conversation with everyone around the dinner party, table, and have a nice range of dishes. So for me, it's I love cooking, but I think as is with most people, when you're hosting, you're more stuck in the hosting element, that you want to get everything right. You want to make sure your guests are enjoying the food, or your family and friends are enjoying the food. So I tend to kind of eat less, but enjoy the whole process of cooking and, plating things up, and just having people kind of enjoy the food that I cook.
Any more? I have a quick one. My mum has an allotment, and at this time of year she will turn up at my house with bags and bags and bags of vegetables, because I'm vegetarian, so she assumes that's all I eat. Are there any, there are too many for me to deal with. Are there any particular dishes that you would recommend that involve pickling or preserving, or something that I can make the vegetables last longer?
Good question, because I also love preserving. So I always say I'm a bit of a grandma, so I'm just stuck in the wrong time. But I love preserving. I used to actually make jams and chutneys and sell them, about several years ago in Walthamstow. So I love kind of the way you can preserve and pickle, make jams out of everything. So that's how traditionally people, preserving is a huge thing in most cultures, and including Bangladeshi cultures. So if you have a lot of surplus vegetables, fruits, always a good jam or a preserve is nice. And I would say if you have, some fruits like berries and things like that, you can actually freeze quite well for a couple of months and then use them up. Or, I think making a jam is one of the best ways, because that kind of preserves it for about a year or so. So definitely I suggest making jams, and, and also pickling things. You can make either chutneys, quick pickles, with it's simply, water, vinegar, and some spices. That's good for short term, so you can just put it in the fridge and enjoy that over a few weeks or a month. But if you want something more kind of long lasting, you can make traditional kind of more pickles, using vinegar, sugar, and not so much oil, but like more kind of slow cooked kind of preserved chutneys, I think. So chutneys are one of my favorites. So I would definitely say make chutneys out of fruit and vegetables mixed together. So I used to make a chutney with date and aubergine. So aubergine, if your mum grows aubergines, that's a good kind of combination to have. Anything like, there's a lot of sweets and savories. I think with chutneys, you can put a lot of sweet and savory things together. So don't be afraid of mixing things up, and just flavoring them, seasoning them well, and it'll last you for a year or more. And also, if you have a lot of fruit, just putting fruit in syrup, preserving them that way, simmering them up. So it's not necessarily jam, so you'll have peach halves or whatever fruit you have. And that also lasts a while. So 6 months to a year. If I used to do that quite a lot, when Dad used to grow a lot of stuff, and then every summer or autumn, I'd have jars of chutneys or jams and just preserved fruits. So I would say also try and make fruit leather. That's something that's also traditional to Bangladeshi food. My grandmother used to make it all the time. You just simmer down fruit, and then dry the sheets if it's a hot day. Obviously, it's quite hard in England, but you can also use a very low setting in the oven as well to do that. So
That's lovely, thank you.
That's amazing.
One question?
A question over there.
I'll just hand you one.
Because I was worried. I love Bangladeshi sweets, but I find them really, really too sweet. And, because of everybody's worried about eating healthy and all that these days. So you mentioned that some of them are made with dates. Right?
Yes, it's one of the ingredients, date syrup.
So obviously, if I'm aware it's made with dates rather than sugar directly, that could be helpful. And also, I know with Bangladeshi cuisine, a lot of things are fried. Have you considered how we can do Bangladeshi food without a lot of frying?
Good question. Actually, I think that's a lot of people, it's kind of a misconception because a lot of people think a lot of things are very sweet or fried often. Actually, it isn't. I think with every cuisine, you've got special occasion dishes or snacks that you can have. Sometimes, I made a halwa which made with flour and ghee called tushashinni, which is a Sylheti specialty in my book. And it's made with ghee, flour and spices, like a spice syrup. But if you just put those ingredients together, it's probably less fat in that dish than making a cake with frosting. But you'd easily have a slice of cake, but then you think, oh, there's ghee. And I had a pot of ghee when I did a demo, and people thought that's a lot of ghee, like half a tub of ghee, but that's probably less than half a block of butter, like half a block of butter, basically. So I think everything in moderation. My thing is, I don't think food is necessarily good or bad. I don't really believe that. I think you have to have everything in moderation. Small amount of something, sometimes it's fine. Like I say, you're saying molasses, dated molasses. This is a healthier alternative. Obviously, still sugar, so you've got to be careful still. But if you want a slightly healthier alternative, you can use a lot of the sweets that we have in the book have dated molasses in them. There's also, I've got lighter sweet dishes. I've got a preserved gourd, ash gourd, morabba, as we call it, in the book, which is an ash gourd. You wouldn't necessarily think that's a sweet dish, but it's kind of like poached pears, how we'd make poached pears, but in a very light syrup. And you have that with a bit of cream and rice. So in the book, I've included not just very sweet dishes. Most of the, actually, you've noticed that if anyone has the book, there's not a lot of overly sweet dishes. So you've got rice puddings and crepes and things like that, but they're not overly sweet. So there's a huge range of moderately sweet dishes that are not necessarily flat fried. There's also steamed and crepes that you can make with hardly any oil. You just brush the pan. And it's so I'd say it's a very kind of overall a healthy cuisine, like a varied cuisine where you can dip and dive into different sections, and you can get something quite rich or quite sweet, or you can also have something very light and very mellow that doesn't include a lot of fat. There's a dish there, shutkishira, in the book, so made with fermented fish, and it doesn't have a drop of oil in it. It's just literally a light broth that's kind of cooked up. So there's a lot of, even the fish dishes, some of them are very light. So in Sylhet, where I'm from, a lot of fish dishes don't use very much oil. So it's more of a broth and a light fish kind of curry rather than something rich. So yeah, I'd say, you definitely find a good range of things that it gives you an insight into home cooking, not because what we see outside is not, I wouldn't say traditional home cooking, because you see the fried things, you see the overly sweet things, but everyday food in Bangladeshi homes is definitely not that.
And also, there's also the Sylheti cooking, which does have a lot more greens in it, isn't it?
Yes, and it's very vegetable heavy. A lot of most meals, meals are eaten in courses. So you start with vegetables, fish, different to other kind of South Asian eating habits, I guess. So you eat with your hand and you start with vegetables, which is a borta or sautés, spinach or whatever. And you have fish, you have meat, and then something sweet, which can be just simply fruits, which is much healthier than having something that's very rich.
I think that was. Thanks very much for that. A round of applause
for
Dina. And,